As a recap of the previous video, I took the opportunity to start where the action would have begun and ended, specifically the Reno Benteen battlefield. It was here that Custer made the two biggest mistakes of his career, and where the siege ended upon the remaining forces' arrival 3 days after the initial battle began. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll get to that later. For now, I wanted to let you know that while I was walking through the areas of the memorial and on the battlefield, I chose to remain silent. As I gathered footage, I documented the specific areas of interest in order to narrate the story at this time. If you enjoy what you will see in this video, please hit the like button and comment below on ways to improve, or let me know of other areas of interest throughout the country that you may want me to cover in the future. All of the events depicted in this video are due in large part to the, quote, defiance, end quote, of the Lakota, Sioux, and Cheyenne tribes to move onto reservation lands as Grant had mandated in 1875. The U.S. Army dispatched 3 massive columns comprised of multiple regiments of cavalry, infantry, and artillery in the spring of 1876. Their objective was to clear the area of the Native American tribes and force them onto the Great Sioux Reservation. Custer's regiment was part of the largest column, coming from Fort Abraham Lincoln. A very significant fact that many people do not know about Custer is that he had aspirations of becoming president of the United States. He believed that if he could secure this victory, then the gold in the Black Hills Territory would revive the economy and he would be considered the hero that made all of that happen. Determined to secure all of the glory in the defeat of the largest number of Native Americans to ever amass in the United States history, Custer's first mistake was that he decided to not wait on the remaining 2 columns. He left all of his heavy artillery behind and led his force of 261 men against the tribes numbering close to 4,000 warriors. In spite of the overwhelming odds, his men followed him into battle because of the circumstances mentioned before, namely the faith in him to lead them into battle and the number of victories Custer had secured to this day. His aspirations would not only not come to fruition, but he would take all of his men down with him. On the morning of June 25th, based on intelligence suggesting that the Lakota and Cheyenne were about to flee, it was here that Custer made a second fateful decision. He divided his forces into 3 groups. He would lead the first group north of the Little Bighorn River and hit the Native American encampment from the northwest. The other 2 were to attack from the northeast and southeast. His specific orders were no retreat. In order for Custer to be successful, he needed the Native Americans to be so occupied that he would be able to swoop in behind their backs and defeat them without much effort. As we know, this did not work out in Custer's favor. By the end of the day, 262 soldiers and approximately 80 Lakota and Cheyenne lay dead. Custer was among them. If he had waited just 2 days, the remaining columns would have arrived and the outcome would have been drastically different. Less than 2 weeks later, on July 4th, all of the major East Coast cities were bursting at the seams with pride and nationalism. On the 100th birthday of the United States, people had come from all over the world to share in the theme of 100 years of progress. On that day, they would receive word that their famous Civil War hero had been killed along a narrow stream in the Montana Territory. Americans were confounded, in shock, and stricken with grief. Americans were devastated, but none more than Libby, the wife of the fallen general. Libby lived another 57 years after her beloved husband's death. For the rest of her days, she tirelessly lobbied public opinion, portraying her husband as a brave, gallant, and noble figure struck down before his time. In spite of his early death, Custer's name would continue to live on in dime novels, art, music, and film. Thanks in large part to Libby, her husband achieved in death the fame he sought in life. For many, the story would end there, but how could I, in good conscience, tell such a one-sided story? What about the disruption to the lives of the Native Americans? Does their story deserve to be told? I think it does. Let's start with the displacement of the Native American tribes, which had been going on for decades. This may have been the final frontier for the citizens of the United States, but this was home to the many tribes that had occupied the North American continent for centuries. Don't get me wrong, I am a combat veteran of a foreign war and a nationalist, but I will not ignore the lives of those that played such a significant role in the history of our country. The common denominator in both of these displacements is a four-letter word that has prompted many hasty decisions in our country's history, namely, that precious metal, gold. Leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse were protecting their land and their people against the force that ultimately proved too powerful to stop. They may have declared victory on the 25th of June in the year 1876, but the irony was that that victory was the beginning of the end for the Native Americans in the West. The American people would not stand for the savages, quote-unquote, to continue to survive with autonomy. The newspaper article headlines I showed earlier stirred up a sentiment that would ensure their demise as a group. One thing that I was pleased to see at this national monument and historical battleground was the remembrance of both groups involved. It is called the Battle of Greasy Grass by the Native American tribes and the Battle of Little Bighorn in history, the river nearby. But whatever you call the area, it is a place for somber remembrance of the lives lost and their significance in history. All of the soldiers that were killed and buried where they fell were later reinterred into a combined grave near where General Custer fell. In addition, there was a significant memorial established to remember the Native Americans that not only fought on these hallowed grounds, but also those that gave their lives in the defense of their land.